Perfect. All right. We are on chapter 18. I need to finish reading Tony and then we'll move on. In 18:1, in those days there was no king in Israel. There was no governing authority to bring God's rule to bear on the nation. That's how the book ends as well. And since people are pretty much doing whatever they liked, the Danite tribe decided to look for territory to occupy. The problem was that the tribe of Dan had failed to conquer what they were supposed to have conquered in the power of the Lord. And so they searched for people weak and helpless enough that they would be able to take their land away. 2 through 6. The Danite scouts found Micah's house, and they asked the Levite about his circumstances. He said concerning Micah, he has hired me because I became his priest. Or he has hired me and I became his priest. Impressed, the men asked the priest to inquire of God so that they could know the way to become prosperous and find a new land. The Levite said to them, go in peace. The Lord is watching over the journey you are going on. Now, that's the kind of thing he was expected to say, what he was paid to say. The Danites weren't paying him to give them bad news, but in truth, if you only get good news from a preacher, he's not doing his full job. 7 through 10. The scouts found a place called Laish, where the people were unsuspecting, and they had no alliance with anyone who would come to their aid. Thus it appeared that the Levite had been right, that God was watching over their journey and had even provided just the kind of target they wanted. Encouraged, they told their brothers, come on, let's attack them. God has handed it over. Verses 11 through 14. 600 Danites set out for Laish. On the way, they came by Micah's house. And the scouts said, Did you know that there are an ephod, household gods, and a carved image and silver idol in these houses? Now think about what you should do. What they should do, what they should have done was destroy the idols and drive out the idol worshiper. If you look at Numbers 33:52. But given how spiritually dark Israel had become, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what they plan to do. 15 through 21. The Danites took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the silver idol. Concerned, the priest asked, What are you doing? But the Danites answered, Keep your mouth shut. Come with us. Is it better for you to be a priest for the house of one person, or for you to be the priest for a tribe and a family in Israel? In other words, they appealed to his pride and materialism, and they said, We are giving you an opportunity for promotion. Leave this house church and come and lead our megachurch. And the priest, ever the opportunist, gathered his idols and moved to his new post. Thus, a compromised priest who had been serving in a compromised house was now moving on to serve in a compromised community. Idolatry was spreading. 22 through 26. Micah gathered a few of his neighbors to chase after the Danites. The 600 Danite soldiers faced them down and asked what the problem was. Micah replied, You took the gods I made the priest and went away. What do I have left? Now any god that can be stolen from you is no good, no god at all. But no one involved in this saga seemed to grasp that. And in the end, though Micah begged for pity, the Danites threatened to harm him and his family if he didn't just accept the turn of events and go home. The Danites then were a gang of thugs who treated their brother Israelite with contempt. There's still some of that happening today, by the way, with the Israelites. 27 through 31. Taking Micah's gods with them, the Danite army continued to fish and killed a quiet and unsuspecting people. They burned and rebuilt the city and named it Dan after their patriarch, who was one of the sons of Israel. That is Jacob. It would become the northernmost city in Israel, a fact often acknowledged in the phrase, from Dan to Beersheba, Israel's southernmost city, which appears throughout the Old Testament. Then they set up for themselves Micah's carved image that he had made and it was there as long as the house of God was in Shiloh. Thus they created an idolatrous stronghold, and though they still kept the Lord in the equation, used his name, and even inquired of him, they were not truly worshiping the Lord. They were worshiping a God of their own making. Wow, that's powerful. And though they still kept the Lord in the equation, used his name, and even inquired of him, they were not truly worshiping the Lord. They were worshiping a God of their own making. Idolatry is a devastating sin that robs the true God of glory and cuts people off from his help. The Lord will not compete with false gods. You do not have to bow down to a statue of wood or stone to commit idolatry. If you look at anything other than God as your source of meaning, provision, deliverance, and fulfillment, you're looking to an idol. Worship and serve the Creator, not the creation. The end.
Chrissy, yesterday there was some discussion about Jonathan as to whether he was a Levite.
Mhm.
And I went back and looked at Worsby. And he said there it was in chapter 17. And when it says a young Levite named Jonathan, and then it references chapter 18, verse 30, had been living in Bethlehem of Judah. And then I looked in my Men of the Bible book, and it doesn't say a whole lot about him other than a Levite who entered the service of Micah as father and priest, the son of Gershom, son of Manasseh. And then it references Judges 17:10 and 18:30.
I don't understand because at the end of 18, then it says the son of Moses. He was a priest, but he was the son of Moses. And that's what the discussion was like. He could not be a priest under Moses. He would have been a priest under Aaron, his brother.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to look up to see if I could find anything else, but
Couldn't find anything either.
no.
There's a lot of good lessons in that one.
They broke all the other
So
rules.
we don't think it's two different people?
No, because at the end of 18, it names him as Jonathan, that he was their priest, and he was the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests of the tribe of the Danites. So it's definitely the same person.
The only other Jonathan that this Men of the Bible list is um the son of King Saul.
David's friend.
Yeah, that's the only other Jonathan this book list. Not to say there isn't other ones, but people have mentioned, I guess.
Any other thoughts on 18 before we move on to 19? All right, my 19 takes a break after 21. Is that where you all break?
I don't have any break.
My first section is a Levite and his concubine, and then the second session is Gibeah's crime. Kim, would you like to read 1 through 21?
Sure. Did I include 21?
Yes, please.
Okay. Judges 19. War against the tribe of Benjamin, the runaway concubine. At this time, before Israel had a king, there was a man of the tribe of Levi living on the far side of the hill country of Ephraim, who brought home a girl from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. But she became angry with him and ran away and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem and was there about 4 months. Then her husband, taking along a servant and an extra donkey, went to see her to try to win her back again. When he arrived at her home, she let him in and introduced him to her father, who was delighted to meet him. Her father urged him to stay a while, but he stayed 3 days, and they all had a very pleasant time. On the 4th day, they were up early, ready to leave, but the girl's father insisted on their having breakfast first. Then he pleaded with him to stay one more day, as they were having such a good time. At first, the man refused, but his father-in-law kept urging him until finally he gave in. Verse 8, the next morning, they were up early again, and again the girl's father pleaded, just stay just today and leave sometime this evening. So they had another day of feasting. That afternoon, as he and his wife and servant were preparing to leave, his father-in-law said, look, it's getting late. Stay just tonight, and we will have a pleasant evening together, and tomorrow you can get up early, be on your way. But this time the man was adamant, so they left, getting as far as Jerusalem, also called Jebus, before dark. His servant said to him, it's getting too late to travel. Let's stay here tonight. No, his master said, we can't stay in this heathen city where there are no Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah or possibly Ramah. Verse 14. So they went on. The sun was setting just as they came to Gibeah, a village of the tribe of Benjamin. So they went there for the night. But as no one invited them in, they camped in the village square. Just then, an old man came by on his way home from his work in the fields. He was originally from the hill country of Ephraim, but was living now in Gibeah, even though it was in the territory of Benjamin. When he saw the travelers camped in the square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. Verse 18. We're on the way home from Bethlehem in Judah, one man replied. I live on the far edge of the Ephraim hill country near Shiloh. But no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have foddered our donkeys and plenty of food and wine for ourselves. Don't worry, the old man said, be my guest, for you mustn't stay here in the square. It's too dangerous. So he took them home with him. He fed their donkeys while they rested, and afterward they had supper together.
In my Bible, excuse me, 19:2, where it says she was angry with him, I have a footnote that says, or she was unfaithful to him.
Mine has those two, but the opposite. My reading says she was unfaithful, and my footnote says, or the Septuagint or Old Latin means become angry with.
Mine says unfaithful.
She must have really been mad. It was 4 months she stayed mad. Wonder what he did.
Oh, surely he didn't do anything.
Whenever you're ready, Cindy.
19:1-10. Here is an example of the kind of personal immorality that went on during this era. 19:1. Concubine. Priests could marry. And there's reference to Leviticus. Though a concubine wife, parentheses, usually a slave, was culturally legal, the practice was not acceptable to God. And there's a reference in Genesis. 19:2, played the harlot. She should have been killed as the law required, and could have been, if there was a devotion to holiness and obedience to Scripture.
I guess I didn't read that as her not being his wife. When I read that like she was his wife. But it's concubine.
Yeah, my Bible explains that having concubines was an acceptable part of Israelite society. Though this is not what God intended, Genesis 2:24, a concubine had the duties but not the privileges of being a wife. Although she was legally attached to one man, she and her children usually did not have the inheritance rights of the legal wife and legitimate children. Her primary purpose was giving the man sexual pleasure, bearing additional children, and contributing more help to the household or state. Concubines were often foreign prisoners of war but they could also be Israelites, as was probably the case in this story.
What was that reference to Leviticus?
It was Genesis 2:24.
Genesis. Wasn't Gideon's mama concubine?
Oh boy, I don't know.
Or was it Gideon? We just read about it, ladies. One of the judges'
They
mom was
said he was the son of the prostitute.
Was it Abimelech? It was Abimelech, wasn't it?
I'd have to check my notes.
Yeah, me too.
My Bible, right?
I think it
I'm
was
sorry.
Go ahead.
You guys were talking about her being mad. I would be mad too if this is right. My Bible here says in 1915, the old man obviously took hospitality seriously. Unfortunately, he took women much less seriously. In fact, he urged the hostile mob to rape his daughter and guests.
That's later on with the rape.
Ah.
Okay.
Gideon had 70 sons, and then his concubine is the one that gave him Abimelech, who ended up becoming a king. So I think that's interesting with that description of the concubine and their kids not having any rights.
Well, so earlier in the Old Testament, those women that, I don't know who it was.
Like
What, the
Sarah,
one guy?
like Sarah and Hagar with Abraham.
Yeah, I mean, he slept with multiple women, and then of course the wife would then become jealous, and she cast out the one concubine and her son. So it's all still the same type thing. And but God, that son did have some right, or God gave him.
Ishmael, which is actually, he also has 12 tribes, which is the Arabs.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it depends.
Sorry, Cindy, I
There
interrupted.
were a couple references there. The one was Leviticus 20:10, and it was saying she should have been killed as the law required, could have been if there is devotion to holiness and obedience to the scripture. And that's what Leviticus 20:10 says, that rightfully she should have been killed. And then it says a priest was not allowed to marry a harlot. And then Leviticus 21:14 says he must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution, but only a virgin from his own people. So he shouldn't have been with her, period, apparently.
What did it say? He couldn't be married? Did you say marry or just couldn't be with?
He must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution, but only a virgin from his own people.
So he wasn't married to her. She was just his sex slave.
Yeah. Even though God didn't condone it. I mean, that's not his intention. It seemed like it was a pretty well-known
It's
practice.
messy when you have extra people in the relationship.
It sure seemed to be well tolerated. I don't get
No.
it. Sorry, Cindy. Do you remember where you were?
Yeah, I do. Okay. His ministry was greatly tainted, yet he made little of her sin and separation and sought her back sympathetically. 1910 Jebus, an early title for Jerusalem because of the Jebusite control. And that was in Judges, until David wrested it away to become his capital. That's in 2 Samuel. Another early name for the city was Salem, and that was in Genesis.
Could you give me those
19
Genesis 19?
Okay. Judas was an early title for Jerusalem, Judges 121.
Yeah.
And another early name for the city was Salem, Genesis 14:18.
I thought there was a second Samuel.
Yes. Well, it says it was Jebus
Okay.
until David wrested it away to become his capital. And that was 2 Samuel 5:6-9.
And what was Genesis?
14:18.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I'm confused here for a minute because I'm just reading through this again, verse 19. Chapter 19. It's explaining there was a man of the tribe of Levi living on the far side of the hill country who brought home a girl from Bethlehem of Judah to be his concubine. But she became angry with him and ran away and returned to her father's house in Bethlehem, who was there about 4 months. Then her husband,
Oh.
taking along a servant and an extra donkey, went to see her to try to win her back again.
Well, somebody read something about there was like legal connection, like they did belong to, but maybe the term wife and concubine made the difference.
It said he had the duties, but not the privileges of being a wife. Although she was legally attached to one man, she and her children usually did not have the inheritance rights of the legal wife and legitimate children. So even though she's attached to him, she's not a wife. So why would he be her husband? Or is this saying that she became angry with the man from the tribe of the Levite? She became angry with that man and ran away. And then what was she maybe married? And then her husband came for her then, which maybe how you could read that two different ways.
I think that they have husbandly rights over these concubines. Whether, they're not married, but they have husbandly rights over these women. And that may be why it says her husband came to get her.
It's like a prenup. You're getting married either as a wife or you're getting married as a concubine, is what I feel like.
Yes.
A
So
prenup.
he's
You're saying I'm
husband.
agreeing to be your concubine or I'm agreeing to be your wife.
They even
But I
call
think he's still the husband's rights.
so she's not a wife, but he's her husband.
Yeah.
Yay.
It ain't fair.
Just twisted.
Sorry, Cindy.
Okay, 1912, Gibeah. Jerusalem was still partially out of the control of Israelites. Gibeah was under Israelite control and presumably safer. 1915. People of the Benjamite town of Gibeah failed to extend the expected courtesy of a lodging. This opened the door to immorality.
Wonder why.
I don't understand that either.
Well, I know like if you were in the streets, you were then accessible to be raped or mugged, or you were out of the safety of someone's home. But normally, like there's no hotels. Normally someone opened their home up to you. Like
And
to
why
be
do you
like that in
suppose
a
they
city street was dangerous.
why do you suppose they didn't? Do you think that there was, for whatever reason, they didn't like him? Or did this just particular town have no nice people that were welcoming?
Or did they arrive late at night?
Well, I think it did say,
Yeah, up here in 9, it says, "Behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Lodge here. Tomorrow you can rise." But the man would not. So I'm wondering if they didn't show up in town after people were in bed.
well, it could be because then in 11 it says, when they were near Jebus, the day was almost gone. And the servants said, "Come, let us stop at the city of Jebusites and spend the night." But that was an alien city, so he didn't want to stop there. So they kept on going till they got to this Gibeah. So it probably was.
It says, though, in 15, "And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night."
Maybe they were afraid to open their doors after a certain hour.
I don't know. You got more, Cindy?
Yes. 1918, going to the house of the Lord. He was headed for Shiloh to return to his priestly duty. 1920, night in the open square. The old man knew the danger of such a place at night. And that's it, 21.
So he was heading back to Shiloh for his priestly duty
Yes.
after retrieving his wife, who had disappeared for 4 months. Okay. What's Worsby say?
There's a little bit of an overview for chapters 19 to 21, War and Peace. After reading these 3 chapters, if you were to scan your daily newspaper or weekly news magazine, you'd have to admit that times haven't changed too much. For in these closing pages of Judges, you'll find reports of wife abuse, blatant homosexuality, gang rape leading to murder, injustice, brother killing brother, and even kidnapping. It's the kind of narrative that almost makes you agree with British essayist Samuel Johnson, who said back in 1783, "I have lived to see things all as bad as they can be." What would he say today? Of course, events like these are daily food of people who enjoy TV violence, and researchers tell us that what happens on the screens is often duplicated on the streets. According to a study by the American Psychological Association, there are 5 violent acts per hour in a primetime TV programs, and on Saturday mornings when the children watch cartoons, violent acts per hour multiply 5 times. When a nation is entertained by violence, is there much hope for that nation? When evil isn't dealt with properly, it has tendency to grow. Sin in the city of Gibeah eventually infected the tribe of Benjamin and led to war in the land of Israel.
So okay, what were those crimes again? They were crimes in these last chapters.
Yeah.
So we would say remaining crimes. How do you word that?
So, in the closing pages of Judges, you find reports of wife abuse, blatant homosexuality, gang rape leading to murder, injustice, brother killing brother, and even
Okay.
kidnapping.
Slow down. Wife abuse,
Blatant homosexuality,
homosexuality,
gang rape leading to murder,
gang rape, leading to murder,
injustice,
okay,
brother killing brother, and kidnapping.
no, there's not that much. I mean, we only have a couple chapters to go.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot happening.
Okay. The wickedness of a city, entertainment in Bethlehem, verses 1 to 9. If you thought that the Levite Jonathan in chapter 17 to 18 was a reprobate, then you probably conclude that this unnamed Levite was an absolute scoundrel of the basest sort. He spent most of his time partying, chapter 19, verses 4, 6, 8, and 22. He walked in darkness and jeopardized his life and the lives of those with him, verses 9 to 14. He treated his concubine in the most shocking manner while she was alive and after she was dead, and what he did to her precipitated a civil war in Israel. A concubine was a lawful wife who was guaranteed only food, clothing, and marital privileges.
Okay, lawful wife. That was guaranteed.
Food,
clothing,
and marital privileges. And there are references to Exodus 21, 7 to 11, and Deuteronomy 21, 10 to 14. I guess that's where the wife part comes in. Any children she bore would be considered legitimate, but because of her second-class status, they wouldn't necessarily share in the family inheritance. And there's a reference to Genesis 25, 1 to 6. If a man's wife was barren, he sometimes took a concubine so he could establish a family. Though the law controlled concubinage, the Lord did not approve or encourage it. Yet you will find several Old Testament men who had concubines, including Abraham, Jacob, Gideon, Saul, David, and Solomon. This particular concubine was unfaithful to her husband and fled to her father's house in Bethlehem for protection. The longer she was gone, the more her husband missed her. How do you miss somebody when you got that many wives? Sorry.
Well, I'm wondering why. Well, never mind, because I read forward. Go ahead.
So he traveled to Bethlehem, forgave her, and was reconciled. He and his father-in-law discovered they enjoyed each other's company and spent 5 days eating, drinking, and making merry. Little did the Levite realize that he really had nothing to be happy about because tragedy was stalking his marriage. To me, this Levite illustrates the careless attitude of many believers today. They are children of the day, but they act like children of the night. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 8. Judgment is around the corner, but these people think of nothing but enjoying life. When his nation was so far from God, how could this Levite waste his time eating, drinking, and making merry? Be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. James 4:9.
What was that, Thessalonians?
1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 8.
Thank you.
Yet there's a time to laugh, Ecclesiastes 3:4, and God wants us to enjoy his gifts, 1 Timothy 6:17. But for many Christians, that time is all the time. In too many churches, the laughter of religious entertainment has replaced the holy hush of worship. The sanctuary has become a theater. When the saints get together, the most important thing is to have fun. In order to salve our consciences, we have short devotional before the fun time ends, and we piously thank God that we've had such a good time. Nobody appreciates laughter and good humor more than I do, but I fear the church is losing its sense of awe and needs to learn how to weep. Had this laughing Levite been walking in the light, praying and seeking God's will, he would have made other plans and saved his wife from shame, abuse, pain, and death. Hospitality in Gibeah, verses 10 to 21. During the period of the judges, it was dangerous to travel in the daytime. And even more,
It was dangerous to travel during the day.
yeah, and there's a reference to Judges 5:6.
Oh, I do remember that.
The Levite didn't want to stay in Jerusalem because it was it was in the hands of pagan Jebusites. Thus he pressed on 4 miles to Gibeah so he could be with his own people. But the men of Gibeah turned out to be as wicked as the heathen around them. To begin with, nobody in Gibeah welcomed the visitors and opened their home to care for them. Since the Levite had plenty of provisions for his party and his animals, he wouldn't have been a burden to anybody, but nobody took them in. Hospitality is one of the sacred laws of the East, and no stranger was to be neglected. But only one man in the city showed any concern. He was an Ephraimite. He not only took them into his home, but also used his own provisions to feed them and their animals. God's people are commanded to practice hospitality. It's one of the qualifications for a pastor. And there are references to 1 Timothy and Titus. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2. That's it through 21.
Oh, wow. All right, 19, 1 through 9. In this sad chapter, we see the Levites continue to facilitate the compromise of Israel. A Levite from Ephraim took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem. Concubines, or mistresses, were typically slaves. Over the course of time, she was unfaithful to him and left him for her father's house. After several months, the Levite went searching for her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. The girl's father was glad to see him, so he stayed with them. On the fourth day, he was preparing to depart with his concubine, but the father-in-law insisted that he stay. This happened every time he attempted to leave. 10 through 12. Finally, the Levite refused to stay any longer. He traveled as far as Jebus, which would one day be called Jerusalem, and it was getting late. His servant suggested that they stay within its borders for the night, but the Levite insisted, "We will not stop at a foreign city where there are no Israelites. Let's move on to Gibeah, which was a town in the territory of Benjamin. Unfortunately, finding a city of Israelites would bring perversion instead of provision." 13 through 21. When they arrived at Gibeah, a city of the tribe of Benjamin, the Levites sat down in the city square, but no one took them into their home to spend the night. Hospitality was an important and valued practice in the ancient Near East. It was customary to offer a stranger a place to stay. So the fact that nobody would do even that basic service for his fellow Israelites shows that at this point in history, there really was no spiritual standard among the people. And that's a recipe for disaster. Finally, an old man who was heading in from a day of hard work in the fields outside town saw the priest and welcomed him into his house. "I'll take care of everything," he said, "only don't spend the night in the square." Clearly, he didn't think it would be safe to camp out in the neighborhood. That takes me to the end of 21. That's a good point when he said that he was concerned for their safety. Any thoughts? Any extra notes?
Well, I thought it was interesting when it said it was not a town of provision, but it was a town of perversion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what happened to Gibeah? Why did they act like heathens?
Because it said the Israelites lived there, correct?
Mm-hmm. They were Israelites.
It was a tribe of Benjamin.
That's right, Julie.
And they just acted vile.
Yes, it says, unfortunately, finding a city of Israelites would bring perversion instead of provision. Dun,
My
dun, dun.
my footnote just basically summarizing the whole, bringing it back to the original, the source of the problem. What is the significance of this tragic story? When the Israelites' faith in God disintegrated, their unity as a nation also disintegrated. They could have taken complete possession of the land if they had obeyed God and trusted him to keep his promises. But when they forgot to include him in their lives, they lost their purpose, and soon every man did whatever he thought was right. When they stopped letting God lead them, they became no better than the evil people around them. When they made their own laws for their own benefit, they set standards far below God's. When you leave God out of your life, you will shock even yourself at what you are capable of doing. So it just all stems back from
Go back
they
to that
left
first
God
couple,
out.
go back to that first couple of lines, Kim. Is he going back to the Danite?
Well, it encompasses, it's 19:1 through chapter 21:25. What is the significance of this tragic story? And all of them, all these stories, I guess, as we move to the end is, remember when we read the moral failure of Israel? All these chapters to the end are depicting the moral failure of Israel. So it's not some, it's going by, it's sourcing a tribe, but the whole gist of it is the moral failure of Israel. And it's just because they left God out, and they could have avoided it if they'd have done what he said in the first place and annihilated everybody, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Just disobedience and doing whatever they want, leaving God
They
out.
annihilated people that were doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
God did not tell them to annihilate those people.
Right.
Those poor Lahish people
Yes.
that became Dan.
Yeah. But like Kim said, when they stopped letting God lead them, they became as evil as everybody around them.
Wow, and those poor people in Laish, like if they were living like I would be thinking this way if I were them. I live a peaceful, loving, kind life, and we do right here. So God will protect us and nothing will ever happen. I mean, like they probably thought they were safe and here we are, God's people coming in and being the evil ones.
Yeah.
Well,
The
what were
tribe
the
of
people?
Levi.
What
Well,
nation that?
Ish probably was not, I don't think they would have been on the border of like the Phoenicians. So I don't know that they would have been God's people because Dan is the highest tribe. Like if you're looking at the map, Lebanon's right here, and like Dan is literally at the very, I have stood in Dan in a foxhole and watched Lebanon Jeeps on the road below. Like it's that close to that northern border. So I don't know. I'm gonna Google. I'm gonna ask Uncle Google where they came from, like who their heritage was.
The original inhabitants of
Yeah.
Laish.
Yeah, like who were their ancestors?
Whose ancestors?
The Lahish or whatever they're called. I didn't pick up on that. Did you?
I don't think it ever said. It just said they were peaceful and prosperous.
Yeah. Which makes
And
me wonder.
he just wanted to go in and take over their prosperous place.
Says this happened in the valley next to Beth Rehob. Rehob. This happened in the valley next to Beth Rehob. It doesn't.
Israelite, it says the portion, it just keeps talking about being reassigned, like to Dan. But it doesn't say who, they just keep calling them Danites, but they would not have been Danites. Dan came in and took over them. It doesn't say who the, maybe Palestinians, because I'm seeing some.
Are you looking up the town of Laish?
Yeah. Are you seeing anything? All I'm seeing is its connection to Dan. I'm asking who the ancestors of the Ish.
There's a map in my Bible and it has Dan, and then in parentheses right beside it, it has Laish.
Yeah, it doesn't say where they came from though. So maybe they were Israelites. I don't know because God didn't assign that land to any of the tribes.
Kathy, at the bottom of that picture you were looking at, where Dan's up by Laish,
Yeah.
if you look down to Judah, it says Dan and Zorah.
Oh yeah, Dan's back down. Dan's down there again. Dan.
It's like he went from Zorah up to Laish.
Troops from the tribe of Dan traveled from Zorah and Eshtaol into the hill country of Ephraim, where they persuaded Micah's priest to come with them. They continued north to Laish, where they ruthlessly butchered its citizens. The city was renamed Dan, and the priest idols became the focus of their worship. So apparently it was Laish, and then it was renamed Dan.
Yeah, but I was wondering like where those Laish people came from, like who were they part of? But I'm not seeing that. Who was their ancestors?
I have the ancestors of Laish were the Danites, a tribe of Israel. The Danites renamed the city of Laish after their ancestor Dan.
Yeah, so they took over and then renamed it. That's what I was getting. It kept saying about Dan, but Dan was not originally there. This is where history comes handy.
It says they named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel.
That was after they took
After they
them.
moved and took over. Yeah, they were supposed to be in the Gaza, what's now the Gaza Strip. But remember, they didn't want to go in there and fight them people. So they moved north to the land that was not given to them.
Yeah, so who were those people basically? Who were their ancestors?
Yes.
Right. I
Where
mean,
did they
surely
come from?
they surely weren't Israelites. They wouldn't have gone in and massacred Israelites.
I wonder if they were like, I don't know, Ammonites or Moabites or something.
Maybe. I know that they were next to the Phoenicians. So I would suspect that I don't think the Phoenicians would have done business with the Danites if it was the Phoenicians' people. And they murdered them. All right. Any other thoughts? If not, this concludes reading of God's word for today. We'll pick back up at verse 22. It's Friday already.
Yeah.
Where did this week go? We'll have to pick back up on Monday then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a doozy.
We might need all week to get through.